Welcome back to Before We Burn Out. In today's episode, we're going to tackle one of the questions that I particularly find really difficult when I'm scrolling through headlines, seeing the disaster that's happening all over the world, and can't help but feel, are we all doomed? Because it does feel like despair is the only rational response. But I know that Sol is going to tell me that despair is not helpful.
Well, we're not here to deny the feelings of despair. Despair is real and it can certainly feel overwhelming, but also acknowledge that despair on its own doesn't work. And today we're going to explore why and what we might choose instead.
Okay, so let me give you some context. Back in April on Earth Day, I saw a clip from BBC Ideas and the Open University who shared some really sobering data. And it told me that nearly half of children and young people said that they were dismissed or ignored when they tried to talk about climate change. And the clip that really sort of stopped me in my tracks was the psychotherapist Caroline Hickman sharing a story about a 10-year-old who had slightly told her off. And he said, "You just don't get it. You grew up thinking polar bears would be there forever, and I've grown up knowing that they will go extinct." And she followed that up with some data that said that when young people were asked how climate change made them feel, 3/4 said that they felt that the future was frightening. And so then we heard from two teenagers who shared something that really, really made me quite sad. And so this is Esther, age 16, and she said, "It makes me feel angry to see such a clear issue and to see everybody knowing about it and still not doing anything." Ugh. Followed up by Imi, aged 14 and younger. "I think climate change is really scary, and the fact that lots of people aren't doing much about it just freaks me out. If you're not prepared to listen to your children, it's going to have a big effect because we actually do have something to say." And so for me, I have to say, these kids are a quarter of my age and I cannot deny what they are saying. I feel exactly the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. And it's a couple of things here, right? It's that the future feels frightening and they're feeling like they're being ignored. So they're scared, there's fear, there's anger. And when they raise it with adults, almost half of them are feeling dismissed. And that's really powerful to hear. And it's really heartbreaking because what's showing up here are two types of pain. Pain around the fear of the crisis and pain of feeling like they're being taken seriously. And that is unfortunately an experience I can really relate with as well.
Yeah, that last line about not being taken seriously reminds me of another podcast that I was listening to, Pod Save the UK, and it was with a climate activist, Patience Nabukalu from Uganda. She's not a young person in the kind of teenage sense, but she is a younger person than either of us. And she was sharing her story and she sort of said, "I became an activist by default, by force. I come from a community that has experienced floods all my life. Children have died. We couldn't go to school when it rained." And so as part of her story, she sort of talked about one of the ways she was tackling this, and she'd come all the way to London to deliver a letter to HSBC at their AGM, calling on them to stop financing fossil fuels. But at that public forum where she had registered her, question, she was allowed to ask it, she wasn't permitted to speak. And I think she sugarcoated it. She sort of said, "Oh, it was a very horrible experience." But I'm like, that's devastating. And I think that's where it connects for me personally. Because of the HSBC story, I started my sustainability career at Barclays. I was one of the people that wrote their first climate strategy. And I wanted to believe that banks could be part of the solution. And here we are 20 years later. And this was the bit that really hit home for me. She said HSBC has a net zero goal for 2050, but 2050 is too late for communities like mine. Promises that far away are a death sentence. And what makes this harder is since that episode aired, in July of this year, HSBC was the first of the UK banks to leave the Net Zero Banking Alliance, having, by the way, been a founding member of that alliance in 2021, which is the industry-wide target-setting group for net zero. And they left because they were following in the footsteps of the US banks, who had all left in January when Trump took office. And as a result of HSBC leaving, a month later, Barclays followed suit. So here's the rub. Young people feel ignored. Climate activists are being literally dismissed. Boardrooms keep deferring responsibility. And so where I sit is, I just think it's just really easy to feel like despair is the only option. But Sol, you often say like, that isn't going to work. So tell me what I can do. Tell me what I can do differently.
Well, I don't think despair does work. It doesn't mean that we can't be understanding and empathetic around experiences of despair. I can really relate to it. I think I remember my peak anxiety around this stuff, around the state of the world, the environment, social issues, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And honestly, it felt awful. And it was painful to feel ignored and mocked even at times, and to feel so disempowered. And when I watched the video of the young people talking about their fear, in a weird way, it actually felt a little bit cathartic, actually, acknowledging a shared experience in a way, but of course, ultimately deeply saddening. It sounds so familiar, too familiar. And it's still how I can at times feel on the inside. It's like my own little scared inner child being expressed through them, through their voices. And I feel like we all kind of have a part of that in us. There's, for all of us, a part that wants to feel in control and safe, and like we're part of something that matters, and we're doing something important that helps. So despair is understandable. It's an understandable response to those thoughts and those feelings, but also to acknowledge that can paralyze us. It can convince us that there's no point in acting, when actually I try to hopefully remind myself that the opposite is true. And one of the things that I do, I try to ask myself regularly, am I in judgment here, or am I in discernment? Am I judging, or am I discerning? Because, and it's a really important distinction for me, judgment for me is what led to my feelings of despair. What led me to burning out. And it took me a really long time to fully realize how much all the added layers of judgment, of criticism, that I was compounding onto myself and to others for years. And it burned me out. And I think catching those judgments, I think those stories, catching that we have looping through our minds, these thoughts of things will never change, nobody's listening to me, I have no power, or thoughts and judgments that we have around other people, the opposition, the people creating this problem. They're lazy, they're greedy, they're selfish. Like, it feels alluring, it feels satisfying, but it hardens our positions, and it makes dialogue, for me, it makes progress more difficult. So discernment, on the other hand, is about going under the surface. It's getting in tune with what are the emotional triggers here, and separating what's actually going on from the stories that we add onto it. And for me, this gives us clarity, and clarity enables us to challenge and channel our energy into something positive.
It's definitely something I can relate to. Over the last couple of years, I've felt myself disengaging from the sustainability world, literally because it felt so hopeless. But then coupled with that hopelessness is the guilt of knowing that if we don't keep fighting, then that despair and hopelessness gets the last word. And so I hear you. I mean, we collectively have got to find ways of staying open, even when it feels impossible. But I find it hard to just tell my brain to switch into a more positive mindset. I wish it was that easy.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's interesting. It's that extra layer of judgment or expectation that we put on ourselves that feels heavy, but it has to be me. I'm the one who has to step up. And you're right. I don't think we can expect of ourselves the ability to just suddenly click into gear and switch mindset. For me, this stuff is a practice. We have to train ourselves to be more capable of being able to catch those criticisms that we compound onto ourselves that lead to the despair. And in fact, if you're happy to, we can practice something. And for those listening as well, we can try something. We can do a practice. And like all my practices, maybe it's helpful to just find a way of sitting that feels comfortable. Let's get ourselves a little bit settled in. We bring intention into our posture, because it can feel a little bit strange to kind of slow down in the middle of things. So let's just invite that in and maybe close the eyes if that feels comfortable. And we're going to just invite some curiosity and some compassion into this experience of despair. So sitting comfortably, but sitting maybe upright, feeling alive, feeling intentionally present. And let's just spend a moment to acknowledge this fear and frustration. Feel into it for a moment. I think it's valid. I think it's worth tuning into. So as we get settled, just noticing if there's any weird or uncomfortable feelings of just sitting here for a moment with our eyes closed. It can feel a little strange to hit the pause button in the middle of busy things, and bringing our attention just into the simple sensation of our feet on the floor and how it feels to have the weight of our body in a chair and our hands resting. Just feel the movement of the breath in the body as you breathe in and out. If your mind wanders, just noticing that and bringing it back. And so for this practice, I'm going to ask you to bring to mind something that feels a little bit uncomfortable or scary or difficult. Nothing too big, maybe a 6 or 7 out of 10 rather than a 9 or 10. It can be something big and existential, the fear that we've been discussing that we carry around us to do with the world or the climate, or it can be something specific to your life. Decision, a responsibility, a pressure. Just take a moment, let something arise. And whatever you've brought to mind, just start to notice what kind of thoughts pop up around it automatically. Notice these different voices. Notice which judgments are, and just ask yourself, what story am I telling myself right now about this situation? What assumptions am I making? What interpretations? And what else might also be true? What part of the picture am I leaving out? What's the more nuanced position? And then just acknowledging how we're feeling about it all. Not trying to fix it or suppress it or change it, just tuning in. Is there fear? Is there anger? Frustration? Or maybe we feel a little bit more stable with it, a little calmer. And just take a slow breath with it. Let yourself feel it. And just breathe with it. And if you want, place a hand on your heart. If that feels okay and comfortable. And just, if there's anything that feels a little bit tender, just allow that. And just notice, if anything, what shifts when we hold the fear, the frustration that way. When we catch the stories and the criticisms and the judgments that we compound onto what's happening in the world and in our lives. And just holding that in compassionate awareness. And then maybe taking a couple of slightly deeper breaths as we bring the practice to a close. Keeping your attention in the body as you breathe. And opening up your eyes. No rush, but opening them when you're ready. And so, Nita, I just wonder how I felt for you, how that was.
It's really interesting when I always think it's such an important antidote. I wish we sometimes did this in more commercial settings of just pausing and taking that breath. I always find it such an interesting practice. And for me, what came up during that was I was reflecting on the headlines over the weekend, which was dominated by Nigel Farage talking about immigration, which for a variety of reasons made my blood boil. But what my fear is doing is then going, there's no point in me applying for any more sustainability roles. And just that practice allowed me to sort of separate the two and go, what is my role in this versus what can I see happening? And I think it's a little bit that analogy of, put your own oxygen mask on first so that I'm strong enough to tackle the hard stuff. So thank you. That's really short and effective. And I hope those of you that are listening, if you didn't manage to do the practice, that you save this episode and try and do it in a moment where you've got a little bit more time.
Yeah, thanks, Nita. And then just to bring this to a close, guys, if this conversation resonated, I've written more about it in a LinkedIn post. There's one there on othering and how it shows up in sustainability work. We'll link it in the show notes if you'd like to read more. And just before we wrap up, I'm just going to offer you some questions to ponder, maybe to journal on and carry with you this week. So firstly, when does despair show up in me? And what does it feel like? Secondly, what story am I telling myself right now about it? Any assumptions, interpretations, judgments? And then finally, what else might be true?
Great. Thanks, Sol. And as always, listeners, you can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts, on YouTube as well, and on our LinkedIn pages. We really would love to hear from you, especially your thoughts and your stories, your moments of despair and your moments of hope. So please do message us.
Thank you for listening. Keep going gently.
See you next time before we burn out.